Good Wednesday afternoon to you, 4 o'clock, time for Sports4CLE. Thanks for joining us. Hope you're having a good day. Let's welcome in Ashley Bastock, Browns beat reporter from the Plain Dealer, cleveland.com. Ashley, I know you wrote an article, really interesting. Browns offense needs to answer some underrated questions, and I'll run through them and we can go through them. So how will they run Deshaun Watson, number one? What will they do with the running back room? And the contracts, what will they look like and how do they improve it? And three, how do they tackle the turnover problem? And those are huge, huge questions.
Yeah, I mean, I think, too, it's like we look at this offense right now, and I think what everyone is focused on, maybe like rightly so, is wondering who is going to call the plays and wondering how Deshaun Watson is going to look coming back from his shoulder injury. And there's actually one other question I left off of there, which is what are they going to do at tackle? Because I think they're going to have 3 starting caliber tackles, and how are you going to afford that? Can you afford that? Do you have to trade somebody? I think that's a valuable question as well. But yeah, the goal of this was just looking at maybe some of these things we aren't thinking about yet, but to me, they're going to be pretty big questions. So first, to start with running Deshaun, I mean, he's a physical runner throughout his career. We know that new offensive coordinator Ken Dorsey has worked with other physical running quarterbacks in Cam Newton and Josh Allen. And I think it's interesting knowing that Deshaun Watson is going to be coming off of this shoulder injury, for which there really isn't a precedent, especially among quarterbacks, to have a glenoid bone fracture in your throwing shoulder. I couldn't find another quarterback. I think a bunch of us looked for it. We could not find another NFL quarterback that had this specific injury. It's pretty rare. But I wonder then, okay, how many hits do you want him to take? How physical do you want him to be? I thought it was interesting when Ken Dorsey was in Buffalo this past year calling plays before they moved on from him. It seemed like they were running Josh Allen a bit less, a bit differently, trying to avoid putting the tread on those tires so quickly. So I think that's really interesting to me. Just how are they going to do it? How conservative are they going to be? How much is Deshaun still going to want to run? Because that is a really, really, really important part of his game. And then beyond that, in the running backs room, I think it's an interesting question of, do you bring Kareem Hunt back? I think you could probably get him for the cheap still, or on the cheap still. I don't know how much he would truly command in the free agency market. But the Nick Chubb contract is still, I think, as Andrew Berry called it, the elephant in the room for the Browns and this offense, because I think everyone looks at the cap hit Nick would take next year for the team versus like what his dead cap number would be. I think even Spotrac potentially has this listed as a potential out year is the language they use for the team. But I would be, I do not think there's any world where the Browns would move on from Nick Chubb. Andrew Berry just basically said as much during his season wrap-up press conference. It sounds like they really want to do right by Nick Chubb, and they should. He's a face of their franchise. He really, I think, is a fan favorite for a reason, and he is the best running back in football right now, I think, if you ask a lot of people, myself included. So in the running aspect of things, those are 2 points that are really, really interesting to me going forward as we go through this offseason and get into offseason workouts.
So along the lines of running backs, you draft, you probably don't take them in the second or third round because you have some other needs. But free agents, there are some interesting ones, and we know that running backs typically don't break the bank free agent wise. So Austin Eckler, DeAndre Swift, those are a couple of guys that are, Eckler's 29, Swift's 25. Singletary, if you connect the dots back to Buffalo before he was in Houston, he was a running back for Ken Dorsey. He's 26. And Zach Moss, Colts, they signed Jonathan Taylor. He's 26. So those are guys that are fairly reasonable because no running back breaks the bank in free agency. Do any of those intrigue you?
I mean, I think any of them would be intriguing in their own way, but I do just wonder how feasible it is. I mean, it's such a weird situation right now for the Browns because they have a clear number one back in Nick Chubb as long as his recovery goes according to plan. I do think it's important to remember, no one really knows what Nick Chubb is going to look like when he gets back out onto the football field. This is the second time in his lifetime, that he's had reconstructive surgery, major reconstructive surgery on this knee, and he's had just about every ligament replaced in it now. And that's, he did it within like a 2-month span, and it sounds like his rehab is on schedule from everything we know right now. But I think an injury like this, there's just some unknowns. So, it's kind of an unknown for any of those free agent prospects as well. Like, is a guy like Austin Eckler or Singletary, for example, really going to want to come in here and be second fiddle potentially to Nick Chubb? Or would they, be open to the idea, kind of like a Kareem Hunt was? I do think Kareem is interesting in that regard. The fact that he has been able to prolong his career the way he has just by willing to do that simple thing and not necessarily have to be the number one back here. And it's worked well. So I think there's an example of it working well here, an example of another strong runner running well with Nick. But I think it's a question of, hey, are any of these guys going to want that possibility of you're going to be the number 2 back because we have Nick Chubb coming back and he's on schedule and he looks great and all that. I think that's a best case scenario, but it makes it interesting to wonder how that room is going to fill out, just given the uncertainty of Nick's recovery and obviously how important he is in this offense.
So Andrew Berry, during that end of the year press conference, mentioned they can do what they need to do to get enough cap space to be active in free agent and do the things they want. Take a look at the free agents that Andrew Berry has added in his tenure as GM. So 2020, it was Conklin, Hooper, Case Keenum. These are the big names. 2021, Johnson, Hill, Clowney. So they went defense. 2022, a little bit of mix. Clowney, Brissett, Jakeem Grant, Taven Bryant. Last year, heavy defense. Tomlinson, Thornhill, Okunrankwo, and Akins, the tight end. Keep in mind they switched coordinators, something they're kind of doing on the offensive side. Here's the spending by year, though. And again, 126 million, 76 million, 52 million, 123 million. What that tells me is when Andrew Berry has seen the need, he's found a way to do what needs to be done. I'm guessing he's going to go to work on the offense. He went to work on the defense a season ago. The offense, I think, probably needs some attention. And we've been able to figure out the thinking a lot with Andrew Berry, and I would guess he's going offense.
Yeah, I think too on the defensive side of the ball, there aren't like a ton of questions for me, and it's interesting too. We were talking about this yesterday. I don't have all the numbers in front of me, but really like this year, financially for them isn't too bad. Like, guys don't start making a ton of money really until like the following year. Like, I'll use Dalvin Tomlinson. I know he's one of those guys as an example. He doesn't have a huge cap hit this upcoming year. Like, on the defensive side of the ball, it's like, well, I don't know. Can we figure out a way to bring Jordan Elliott back? That like might actually be their biggest question, since they already have given Grant Delpit a contract extension. I think Grant was really the biggest question on that side of the ball. Now maybe it's like Jordan Elliott, or are we going to bring Zadarius Smith back? Those kind of things. But yeah, I think it's interesting because it just seems like this team, the last couple of years, they haven't quite figured out their pass catchers, specifically their receivers. And I think obviously Amari Cooper might be one of the best moves Andrew Berry has made in his tenure here. It might be the best move. But besides Amari, it's like they haven't had anyone quite step up. And I'm curious, like maybe we'll get a jump from Elijah Moore. I think he really suffered because he was supposed to be this guy that clicked with Deshaun Watson and helped him do the things that he's really good at and improvising and that sort of stuff. And then Deshaun was hurt. So I'm curious what they think about Elijah, but I'd be really curious to see, hey, how are we going to handle these receivers in free agency? I think they should be aggressive. I don't think they should rely on a second or third round draft pick to really up production in that room outside of Amari Cooper, just because we haven't seen that work the last 2 years, right? Like, we haven't seen David Bell or Cedric Tillman come in and totally blow people away to the point that, wow, this guy is definitely our number 2 receiver behind Amari. There's a learning curve there when you get out of the first round, especially. So I would like to see them be aggressive in that way. I definitely agree. I think there's more questions on the offensive side of the ball between the running back room. And like I mentioned earlier, what are you going to do with your offensive tackles? Would you potentially look to trade a Jedrick Wills? Would you look to part ways with Jack Conklin? Because ultimately, the takeaway for me is DeJuan Jones is a starting tackle in this league, point blank period. And right now, he's about as cheap as you can get a good starting offensive tackle because he's on a rookie deal and he was taken later in the draft. So that's in theory like a gold mine for this team and their cap space right now.
Yeah, and to your point, the only way he gets better is by playing and getting even more experience and getting to do the things that he needs to do in the run game. Along those lines, we do know who the offensive line coach will be for the Cleveland Browns. The Browns are hiring ex-Seahawks offensive line coach Andy Dickerson as their new offensive line coach. Albert Breer tweeted this out not too long ago. Spent time with the Rams under Sean McVay. He will replace Bill Callahan in Cleveland, who went to coach with his son, went to coach for his son. Also, Alex Van Pelt has kind of come in and got Brown's assistant offensive line coach, Scott Peters. So Scott Peters, who worked under Bill Callahan for 4 years, going to the Patriots, where he will be on offensive coordinator Alex Van Pelt's offensive staff. So it's almost a complete overhaul of the offensive coaching staff.
Yeah, I mean, Chad O'Shea is, I think, the last man standing there right now. And Callie Brownson, of course, who's been his assistant the last couple of years in the receivers room. But yeah, I think it is interesting. I wasn't surprised to hear Andy Dickerson's name come up very shortly after that news about Scott Peters broke, just knowing they had brought him in for an OC interview. So I'm sure they liked what they saw, and they probably knew, hey, like Bill Callahan might not be here next year because of Brian getting this job in Tennessee. I think we always kind of knew the Browns weren't going to hold Bill Callahan back from going to do that. It's such a rarity that a father and son would get to work together like this. It's, I think, totally understandable for everyone involved why Bill Callahan would want that chance. And hey, if they wanted to, I thought it was interesting. I was curious if Scott Peters was going to go somewhere else or stay, because I know these players like really loved him. And I talked about this year especially, it felt like everyone always goes out of their way to praise Bill Callahan. Like, he might be the best position coach, period, in the NFL. He's obviously a genius with the stuff we've seen him do with the guys on this line. But every time a player praised Bill Callahan, they also went out of their way to praise Scott Peters. So I'll be really curious to kind of see how he does in New England. Guys seem to really like him. But yeah, not surprised that Andy Dickerson is the name who ended up here, knowing he had been in Cleveland for an OC interview before they hired Ken Dorsey.
Ashley Bastock, Browns beat reporter for the Plain Dealer, cleveland.com, and I'm going to step aside, take a quick time out. Other side of the break, we'll continue talking offense, what this offense might look like with Ken Dorsey and a new offensive staff. Sports4CLE, be right back. Stay with us.
You might have expected all the games and all the excitement. And even though you couldn't see it right away, it's all right here. 5 games in one. $22 million in prizes between $25 and $500, and a shot at $1 million grand prize. Golden Casino. A night's worth of excitement for just $10.
We continue talking Browns with Ashley Bastock, Browns beat reporter for the Plain Dealer, cleveland.com. A little earlier, we kind of talked about Ken Dorsey and running Deshaun Watson. Dorsey, in his introductory press conference, talked about Watson running and taking hits as well.
These guys are so competitive. They want to win. Deshaun wants to win, and he's going to do anything humanly possible to help this football team win games. And sometimes that's going, putting your body on the line to do so. Now, what we got to do is make sure we're evaluating when we're doing those things. Is it first down and we're scrambling? We got a first down already. Get down, get out of bounds. And save yourself the hit and those types of things. Those are all things that we'll look at, because clearly, like this team is at a different level when he's on the field. And that's the thing that we want to do as a staff is make sure we're communicating to him and him communicating with us, kind of what he's feeling, what he's seeing, and making sure we're doing everything possible to keep him healthy.
And Ashley, the thing I would say is it's an evolution process. I mean, Lamar Jackson had to learn how to not take hits and stay healthy for a season. What was your takeaway from that press conference when you listened to Ken Dorsey?
Yeah, I think ultimately for me, the biggest takeaway with Ken Dorsey in general is this isn't his first trip around the block with playing or working with a quarterback like this. And I do think, everyone always wants to compare Cam Newton and Josh Allen. Like, I do think broadly they're very similar to Deshaun Watson, but each of those guys is unique in his own right. And for me, ultimately, one of the biggest differences with Deshaun is how he's built. And he's smaller than Josh Allen, which I think, some people might not know. So I do think you, in general, have to play him kind of differently. But I do think that's an interesting strategy, and to hear Ken Dorsey talk about it, because hey, there is some times where you just want to throw the ball away to avoid taking the sack, to avoid taking the hit. There's some times where you do want to make that physical run and play a bit more of that kamikaze sort of style that Josh Allen plays. But I do think his experience there was just my biggest takeaway, that he's somebody who already has the experience of working with the quarterback, who likes to freelance a bit more, who plays a bit more physical. And I think Deshaun Watson might be better suited for a coach like that. And obviously the Browns think that too, or they wouldn't have made that move. I don't think Alex Van Pelt, the decision to move on from him, had anything to do with, he did something wrong or he did something the Browns didn't like. But when I think of Alex Van Pelt and his, some of the best contributions he made in Cleveland, I think he is almost more well served with a project, a guy who's a bit more of a project, who is going to stay within a system a bit more, because I think of him as, he's the guy who helped Baker Mayfield get his feet right, for example, right? Like, he's really good at those kind of things. But obviously a guy like Baker Mayfield is a very different quarterback than Deshaun Watson. So I think it can't hurt just to get somebody in here who has that kind of experience of working with a quarterback, who's going to be physical when they run, who he's going to help Deshaun Watson know when to hold him, know when to fold him in those situations, because he's seen all this before. So I think, to me, that's the biggest takeaway from when he talked about that at his press conference on Monday.
The other thing that, we've kind of talked around a little bit is the wide receiver position. I know you wrote an article kind of looking at the early mock drafts. So these are pre-combine mock drafts, and most of them have the Browns going wide receiver at that second round pick in the 50. I think it's 58. When you look at that, does that make sense? As we've said, there hasn't been a guy that I think you probably have to go back to Braylon Edwards, the last time they drafted a wide receiver and had some success with him.
Yeah, I think I'm not surprised that all of these mock draft analysts and mock drafts have the Browns going in this direction. Do I think it's accurate after now covering my second or third draft with this team? Not necessarily. I think it's just the very obvious position of need for the Browns. So people are going to be focusing in on that. I think it's understandable, but we've seen how Andrew Berry works. If this team has a best available player at a DB spot that's available, they'll take that guy, even if they don't necessarily need another DB on the surface level. That's how they wound up with Martin Emerson Jr. So I think, especially if their first pick is in the second round, if they keep this pick, or if they trade it away and get another third rounder or something, which obviously they did last year, I wouldn't want to even guess. I think even when we get closer to the draft, we're not going to know. So I think it's just easy bait sort of for analysts and draft analysts. And when you're looking at this roster, what needs to happen? Receiver is the obvious answer. But for me, I don't know if we can count on Andrew Berry going in that direction once they're actually on the clock, because I think it's going to depend on who else might be available. And if they think they're getting a steal with somebody like they did with Martin Emerson Jr., they'll go after that guy. It doesn't matter what position he is.
Yeah, that's fair. I remember being stunned that they took a cornerback, and it's worked out pretty well, to say the least. What areas of the roster, when you look at it, do you think need the most attention? Obviously, we've talked a little bit about wide receiver. What areas do you think need to be addressed?
Yeah, I mean, to me, it's really receiver is the number one, and the running back room is number two, right? It's these things that we've been talking about, but I think defensively, for the most part, it's like you're pretty set this next year, right? Like your DBs were pretty good. Like I don't know, you had Juan Thornhill dealing with a nagging calf injury for most of the season. I know people were questioning his production, but I do think they still really like him. Linebackers are pretty set. I don't know. I think ultimately on defense, your biggest question mark to me is, hey, are you going to go out and get another edge? I think, for as much as this team has tried to steer the conversation away from sack production, I get it analytically. I know pressures matter, but sacks are still the moneymaker. And they never really had, I think, Zadarius Smith or Obo Okoronkwo emerge in the way they expected. They thought they were going to be having three guys pushing double-digit sacks. And now Obo was playing with one arm. He had to miss like a month because of his pec tear. I think Z got going later in the season. I think some fans might have been disappointed with his production, but I wouldn't be opposed to him coming back. But, I don't know if he will, because he is going to be a free agent and kind of have his choice of where to go. So I think you could always look to add another good quality edge rusher to this defense to maybe be, emerge as the true number two opposite of Myles Garrett. So I would say for me, those are the three positions that I'm really questioning and think they maybe need to add something to. And two of those positions, receiver and edge rusher, are, of course, marquee positions. So probably understandable why I would expect to see some sort of additions happen there. Not necessarily changes, but additions.
Yeah, I would think they probably would like to get Shelby Harris, and Maurice Hurst back if they can on similar type deals where they have one-year deals. And I mean, they were effective as defensive tackles.
Yeah, those are two guys I know that I've written about before. And again, you look at their free agents, guys that they have coming up, there's really not a ton, I think, that fans have to be worried about in terms of guys leaving. But I think a guy like Mo Hurst and Shelby Harris, they were both great. They're, maybe both more role players. I think Mo would probably play a bit more than Shelby at this point in Shelby's career. But those are two guys I think ultimately they're not going to have a huge price tag, which is great for the Browns, especially Mo Hurst, because I think unfairly he has this reputation of, injuries derailed his season again, when Mo Hurst was really healthy here, and his torn pec was just sort of a freak injury that happened and cost him the back half of the season. But I think he would be huge. He was a great locker room guy for this team. Could do just about anything. People will remember his interception in Seattle, where he had to line up on the outside opposite of Zadarius Smith. And he told me, I've never really lined up there at edge like that before standing up, but I did. And he made a play when he did it. So I would really love to see those two guys back. But inversely, I think Jim Schwartz knows what he likes, knows what he wants. And if they don't come back, if they go somewhere else, he'll be able to, kind of help point them in the right direction of, hey, this is a guy who I think would work really well in this system or something like that.
Ashley Bastock, Browns beat reporter for the Plain Dealer, cleveland.com, and I are going to step aside, take one more time out. Other side of the break, we'll continue talking some tough decisions that Andrew Berry has to make about this Browns roster. Sports4CLE, we'll be right back. Stay with us.
Come back to go forward. Back to learning new things. Back to pursuing your dreams. Tri-C has flexible learning options to fit your life. And every year, more than 1,000 local companies provide Tri-C students with real-world learning. The right education can boost your lifetime earning power by hundreds of thousands of dollars. Start now with a college education you can afford. Tri-C, where futures begin.
We continue talking Browns with Ashley Bastock, Browns beat reporter for the Plain Dealer, cleveland.com. Well, United Airlines has an ad featuring Kyle Chandler. He's known for playing coach Eric Taylor, Friday Night Lights, and they're targeting Browns fans.
Cleveland, I know you're watching other people's teams play today, but this season you got everyone's attention. The grit, the wins, the defense. Next season, you get the title, finally. Browns fans, this is about believing. Believing so hard that you book your flight to next year's big game before the season even starts. Because believing that hard can change everything.
Ashley, I saw that and I couldn't stop laughing. Credit United, always looking.
Yeah. Yeah, I'll tell you, when I saw this at first, I heard about it, and then it came up on my TikTok For You page, and I was like ready to run through a wall or something. You got Coach Taylor telling Browns fans that, hey, next year really is the year. He even knew the defense talking point. I was really impressed with that. And whoever wrote this ad, whoever briefed Kyle Chandler, man, I felt like I was in the Dylan High locker room hearing Coach Taylor give a post-game speech, or maybe a pre-game speech. And what a great guy that they got to come in and give that. I mean, truly, I'm not a marketing person. I'm not an advertising executive, but that's like Don Draper levels of advertising creativity to me. I absolutely loved it.
All right. Andrew Berry has some tough decisions. What do you think that contract-wise, what do you think the toughest decisions, how do you think they shake out?
I really just think that, for me, the toughest decision continues to be the Nick Chubb contract, because I do think you have to do right by Nick Chubb. And I think that's the biggest deal that's going to be. Like Andrew Berry himself said, it's an elephant in the room. And I said it at the time. The fact that, Andrew famously does not give away in his own does not give a lot away in his press conferences. He has been self-deprecating about that fact before. We all know it. We talk about it all the time. So the fact that he even referred to it as an elephant in the room, to me, is incredibly noteworthy, because look, I think the reality is, again, I don't have the numbers in front of me, but they're going to have to figure out something there, whether it's an incentive-based contract, whether it's some bonuses that they can give to Nick Chubb, something. But I do think that is, the top priority for me is how are they going to figure that out? Because ultimately, you can't let things just stand pat, knowing the injury he's coming off of, knowing what your cap situation is. So really, that is just the biggest question. And then secondary to that is, hey, are you going to decide to move on from Jack Conklin, or are you going to try to trade Jed Wills? Just because of the discussion we had about the tackle situation. I don't know if you really need two of those guys. The Conklin extension just happened in 2022. Knowing his injury history, I was a little surprised that he got that extension when he did. But hey, you've lost another year of him because of his own season-ending injury. So those, to me, are like the top two guys I'm most curious about, is what's going to happen with Nick Chubb's deal. And I think Nick Chubb's going to stay in Cleveland. It's just going to be, how do they work the deal out? But is Jack Conklin going to be here next year? And I think this team learned, interestingly, too, that tackle you can get thin at pretty quick. So would they want to keep him around? I don't know. But you're going to have three guys who I think all would expect to start in that room. So I'm curious to see how they handle it, and if Jack just sort of ends up being the guy that they move on from. But I don't think, we talked about this yesterday on the Orange and Brown Talk podcast, I just don't think there are a ton of cap casualty guys on this team. They're in pretty good shape for this upcoming year. So it is interesting.
The other thing, what do you think happens with Greg Newsome's fifth-year option? That's a guy that, number one, a first-round pick, but you have the big contract with Denzel. You have Martin Emerson, who's a later-round pick, so you don't have the fifth-year option. That's a decision that has to, you have to make at some point.
Yeah, I think Greg's fifth-year option is definitely going to get picked up. I mean, I would be shocked if it wasn't, honestly. I think it gets picked up, and then you figure it out later. It's sort of what we saw with Jed Wills this past year, obviously. I think everyone's like, are they going to pick it up? Are they going to pick it up? Of course they're going to pick it up. Andrew Berry, I think, is so enamored with his draft picks. He's very slow to give up on them, quote unquote. So, yeah, I mean, I think Greg Newsome has proven himself in the slot. And, I think a recency bias, a lot of fans might remember that Houston game and blame him for some of the things that went wrong in that game. But I think overall, Greg Newsome has found his groove here and in this defense, and everybody seems really happy with him. So I think this team really values defensive backs. They really value corners. They're really good at drafting them and at building that room. So I wouldn't expect there to be any kind of change there, really.
Yeah, I mean, as much as they've struggled with wide receivers, they've had that much success on the other side of the ball with the defensive backs. All right, before I let you go, I know you had season MVPs and then most disappointing performances in 2023. Take us through those two, the highs and the lows, if you will.
Yeah, I think the highs to me, it all revolves around two guys. It's Myles Garrett and it's Joe Flacco. And, I think we ended up giving it to Myles on the Orange and Brown Talk podcast. Just because he's probably going to win Defensive Player of the Year. He's the best player on the best defense. He didn't have his sack numbers. He did kind of fall off that sack cliff a little bit, but overall, you look at his production, the way he's double teamed, he was number 2 in the league in pass rush win rate, I believe it was, behind Micah Parsons. And he just, I think, is leading the pack for that Defensive Player of the Year award. But again, with Joe Flacco, you look at what he did. I think the 2 pick sixes in Houston might maybe slightly taint the memory of his time here, but I doubt it. I mean, he was one of the best stories in the NFL this year. I think there's no way this team makes the playoffs if they didn't luck into signing Joe Flacco. The fact that he did not have a job yet was very lucky for the Cleveland Browns. And then we talk about most disappointing. I think we kind of made this one a bit more broad. Like, there are certain guys, you look at their individual production, but for me, I think the most disappointing factor was just Deshaun Watson's season going how it did. And we kept repeating this on the podcast. I believe it's not his fault that he was hurt, right? But I think now it's disappointing that we're entering year 3 of this really huge deal. And we still don't really know who Deshaun Watson is in this offense. We have a really small sample size. And now on top of that, there's all these questions about this shoulder injury and how it might impact him. So for me, that was what I nominated. I truly believe that it's okay to say it was disappointing and we expected more, even though a guy got an injury that wasn't his fault.
Ashley Bastock, Browns beat reporter for the Plain Dealer, cleveland.com as always. Appreciate the time and the insight. Thanks very much, Ashley.
Thank you.
Ashley Bastock, make sure you check her out. Great Browns coverage, Plain Dealer, as well as cleveland.com. We're going to step aside, take a quick time out. We continue talking Browns. Jeff Lloyd from the Locked On Browns podcast, straight ahead on Sports4CLE. Stay with us.
Come back to go forward. Back to learning new things. Back to pursuing your dreams. Tri-C has flexible learning options to fit your life. And every year, more than 1,000 local companies provide Tri-C students with real-world learning. The right education can boost your lifetime earning power by hundreds of thousands of dollars. Start now with a college education you can afford. Tri-C, where futures begin.
You might have expected all the games, and all the excitement. And even though you couldn't see it right away, it's all right here. 5 games in one. $22 million in prizes between $25 and $500, and a shot at $1 million grand prize. Golden Casino, a night's worth of excitement for just $10.
I am powerful beyond my wildest imagination.
I will define my future.
I will keep challenging myself to improve.
Because I am a future leader of this great nation.
I will be responsible for raising a beautiful family.
And educating not only my generation, but many more to come.
I will make a difference in my community.
And I will stand up for what I believe in.
I will not settle for simply chasing my dreams, I will achieve them.
Because I was given a chance.
An opportunity.
A home.
At Family, Career, and Community Leaders of America.
The ultimate leadership experience.
FCCLA has been one of the greatest experiences of my life.
It's made me who I am today.
Join us. We'll build a new future together.
We continue talking Browns on Sports4CLE. Let's welcome in Jeff Lloyd from the Locked On Browns podcast. So, Jeff, we heard from Ken Dorsey, new offensive coordinator. What kind of changes do you think he brings to the offense? Does it look drastically different than it did last year, or is it just kind of subtle changes, do you think?
Well, we've had these conversations for a long time, Dave, about the one thing that the Kevin Stefanski offense has always had an issue with in their time here was getting the ball down the field vertically with any regular consistency. Now, we did finally get a glimpse of that, obviously, during this, this 6-week Joe Flacco, historic run that we all kind of fell in love with. And you saw that the Browns were able to do it consistently there. Obviously, Ken Dorsey and his time with Josh Allen, the yardage and the amount of yards he was able to put up each and every season were just a large number, certainly 22. And that's, I think, something where, something they're going to look to take from Ken Dorsey. Sometimes, you don't always, improve yourself by looking at your positives. The best way to improve yourself is probably by looking at your negatives. And that is one thing that has kind of been a struggle for Coach Stefanski's offense in his entire tenure here in Cleveland. Not so much really an issue for the Buffalo Bills, certainly. With that does come the possibility of, turning it over a little bit more. But, sometimes, when you are going for, it all 40, 50-yard completions, sometimes you got to live with the fact that, there are going to be some negatives that come along with that. I think the other thing is, with the Bills, there was a little bit more concerted effort to run the ball, between the tackles, between the guard center gap. And I think the Browns would like to diversify their running game a little bit more. A team that had been primarily a wide zone team for most of the time. You're going to transition now where, Deshaun Watson prefers to play from the gun, which doesn't translate or mean necessarily that you can't be a wide zone team. It's a little bit harder to do. It probably means you're going to try to go a little bit more inside zone. But the Browns themselves, you don't want to be just basically a one-trick pony. You want to basically add more, keep what works, kind of push away what doesn't. And these are things that they can probably get with Ken Dorsey joining this offensive staff.
Dorsey does, at least if you take into account what happened in Buffalo in that offense, more shotgun, more RPO. Do you expect those things to be incorporated more into this offense?
Shotgun, definitely. RPO, certainly I would think that's going to be something they're going to go with, but, something I think the Browns are going to probably be a little bit more cognizant of. RPO, it's not necessarily going to mean the quarterback. I think the Browns have, learned that, what Deshaun Watson can give you with his legs is great. But he's also not built like Josh Allen at 6'5", 245, 250, whatever he is. And, Deshaun Watson, obviously, 2 hits last year, obviously while trying to run the ball, turned out to be, pretty significant injuries. And the Browns just can't afford to keep taking that risk with Deshaun Watson. If they want him to be the best caliber quarterback he can for their team, it's probably time where Deshaun Watson basically stays in the pocket. No more design runs. Look, if something breaks down and he makes a play with his legs, that's fine. But I think the Browns would like to, get to a situation where Deshaun Watson is doing more within his arm, and they'll take whatever they can get, the little amount they can get of him with his legs.
The other thing is we now know that Andy Dickerson is going to be the replacement for Bill Callahan. So you got a new OC, a new tight ends coach, a new line coach. With all these changes, are there going to be more noticeable changes to the offense, do you think? I know Kevin Stefanski's the same. It's his offense. But is it going to be a different-looking offense more so than it has been in the past?
I think this is going to be a sign of Kevin Stefanski opening up the room a little bit more. And, when you saw what the Browns did last year and all the success they had, there were still issues on the offensive side of the ball. This team turned the ball over way too much. And some of that might have to do with the fact that you did play 5 different quarterbacks. That's obviously not something any team is looking to do. Certainly has to, equate to the fact that you had issues with your offensive line and you were down a lot of guys for a significant amount of time and playing your 4th and 5th offensive tackles, down the stretch the last 7-8 weeks of the season. Certainly was not the best situation. But, again, Coach Stefanski here in this, what will be year 5, it's time to, get a jump here from the offense. And, year 1, obviously, offense was good. Year 2, obviously, a lot of issues. Year 3, there were a lot of issues, obviously a lot of factors within that. And last year, the offense was better, but it could have been even better. But there were a lot of factors in that. Just trying to get it a little bit more consistent. And you'd be foolish. I mean, because I honestly believe, other than maybe offensive line coach, all these upgrades, all these assistant coaching hires on the offensive side of the ball, I would consider upgrades. So you're not going to basically hire these guys, bring them in without, trying to, pick their brains and, letting them get to work, letting them get to know their guys, and then basically going to them and say, all right, this is normally what we like. Is there something we're missing? Is there something we should take out? Is there something we should add? It certainly came, an interesting path the way that the offensive line coach spot worked out. But, it's tough losing a guy like Bill Callahan, but, you kind of have to understand the reasoning behind it. And they're hoping they can get a return of investment like they did on the defensive side of the ball last year. But I mean, the changes they made and not only just bringing in coaches, but obviously going to add a lot more talent to the positions on the offensive side of the ball, and looking to see if they can get that, big step up in 2024 from the offense like they did from the defense in 2023.
Along those lines, let's talk a little bit about receiver. I think you agree that's one area that needs to be upgraded. What do you think they do with Amari Cooper's contract? It's a $23 million cap number. And then do you think they try to find a receiver or two in free agency? Do they draft? Do they do one? How does that work out to upgrade the receiving core?
Well, Amari Cooper's contract obviously going to work, and they're going to somehow, some way, that's obviously going to bring them some cap relief. You turn whatever significant portion you can into a signing bonus, and it might be a really, really tough spot to even go to Amari Cooper. And would you even say is there anything we can do here as far as working the overall value of this? And it's really tough to say because Amari Cooper has had 2 incredible years, obviously, for the Browns. And it's really difficult to go to a guy who's put out that type of production the last 2 years and kind of say, hey, well, can you take a pay cut? So, they can get themselves some flexibility by turning some of that certainly into a signing bonus. As far as filling out the room, I think you're going to go – I think you would do both. I honestly believe you're going to look to try to bring somebody in through free agency. There are guys available. Question is going to be how much are the Browns willing to spend. The other thing is that this is a really, really deep wide receiver class. You don't be foolish. You go to the store, you don't necessarily bring a list. You go to the store and basically pick on what they have. And this draft class it's deep, it's extensive. There are a lot of players, and the Browns would be foolish not to probably double dip here, one through free agency, another obviously through the draft here, understanding that this will most likely be Amari Cooper's last year. And then you got to start building the overall length of that room. Lost year for Cedric Tillman. I do believe some of that is probably due to the fact that, it's really, really tough as a rookie to play with that many different quarterbacks. But you don't necessarily know what you have there. David Bell is a nice possession guy. I think you got some of what you were hoping from Elijah Moore. You're hoping there's a big step up there. But you're not going to make, any guarantees about anything. Just like last year when they signed Okoronkwo, they already had Myles Garrett. They already drafted a defensive end. They already had Alex Wright. They already had those 4 guys, and they still went out and made a trade for a player like Zadarius Smith. There is not going to be, might be some guys with some hurt feelings, but the Browns are going to go all in talent-wise at several positions on the offensive side of the ball.
Yeah, much like they did defense last year. I think the offense needs that kind of injection of talent in free agency and the draft. Jeff Lloyd and I are going to step aside to take a quick timeout. Other side of the break, we'll continue to look at what the Browns might do on the offensive side of the ball. Talk some free agents. Sports4CLE, be right back. Stay with us. The Ohio Lottery Partners in Education program is dedicated to recognizing exceptional students, teachers, and schools throughout Ohio. Scan the QR code on screen to nominate students and teachers as Academic All-Stars and Teachers of the Month. They must be currently enrolled or teach in grades K through 12. Is your K through 12 school developing students' literacy skills to achieve success in reading? If so, you can nominate your school for the School of the Year. Students can win $100, teachers can win $500, and schools can win $2,500. Scan the QR code, fill out the forms, and nominate deserving students, teachers, and schools today. The Ohio Lottery Partners in Education program takes pride in honoring exceptional students, teachers, and schools across Ohio. Submit your nomination today. It's fun, fast, and free. We continue talking Browns with Jeff Lloyd from the Locked On Browns podcast. This one from Sports Illustrated. 5 biggest positions of need for the Browns this offseason. Number 1, we've talked about this, wide receiver. Best way to address it, free agency or trade, they say. They mentioned Cooper is the only one, and that Moore didn't meet expectations. Number 2, defensive line. Best way to address it, both free agency and trade. Again, they mentioned linebacker. Best way to address it, free agency and draft. And then number 4 is offensive line. They say best way to address it is draft. Number 5, running back. Best way to address it is for the draft. The one thing is I'm thinking about this, Jeff, that the Browns haven't been able to really develop wide receivers when they've drafted them, and there's a couple of reasons why. They haven't had the quarterback. Quarterback and wide receiver kind of work in tandem, and they haven't been able to get the quarterback right. So that's one of the reasons, I think.
Well, I mean, yes and no. I mean, this team and this regime did develop Donovan Peoples-Jones, who was basically one of their lowest drafted wide receivers that they had during their tenure. The problem is there, like you said, a lot of fluctuation at the quarterback position. And David Bell, what exactly was supposed to be the role? I'm assuming everybody thought the role would be higher. But you look at the way the roster was structured when he was selected. How high could he get? And it's also when you're not you're going third round, fourth round, and bringing these guys in those rounds. The probability and hit rate obviously is going to be lower. Also, they've been drafting in some wide receiver classes that haven't been as good as others, and trying to make it a premium position when the guys don't basically check all the boxes. This class I think does offer the ability where I don't think it's going to take much guesswork, because I'd say probably there's got to be 25, 30 wide receivers in this class right off that look like they are going to probably check a lot of boxes as far as production, as far as athleticism. But yeah, I mean, it's definitely a fair thing to say. But it's also really difficult when in 2021, your starting quarterback, when he was there, was banged up and was playing hindered. In 2022, you played a veteran for half the season. Then you brought in your franchise guy for 6 games. 2023, it was your franchise guy. Then it was your rookie. Then it was obviously PJ Walker. Then it was your franchise guy. Then it was your rookie. Then it was PJ Walker. Then it was Joe Flacco. Then it was, it's really, really tough to, develop relationships. A wide receiver and a quarterback should look at each other and know exactly what they're going to do, as soon as they hit the line of scrimmage. It's really difficult to do that, when the relationships aren't where they need to be. Granted, when Joe Flacco was out there, it was a really, really great thing. But yes, the Browns absolutely need more out of the wide receiver position. Obviously, teams are going to, when teams come to play the Browns next year, or the Browns travel to them, it's all going to be about the opposing defenses trying to take away David Njoku and Amari Cooper. And other guys are going to have to step up. I think that hence the changes that have been made within the coaching, which will also lead to some changes within the offense, adding some things, taking some things out. But the Browns, need, minimum to bring in a veteran wide receiver, draft a wide receiver, and it's not going to be about feelings anymore. Best man's going to win, and it's not going to be about what your standing was on the totem pole, any of that. The best players are going to play. The Browns just got to go find some better players and get this competition battle up to one where, hopefully everybody does improve. But it does mean that some guys probably, just they're not going to see the reps that maybe they've been accustomed to.
Yeah, the other positions, defensive line, yeah, I would agree. Offensive line, yeah. Running back, yeah. Linebacker, I don't know that they just don't. They have Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah. I don't know that they're going to try to upgrade it if they get Sione Takitaki. I think it's more of a fill-in for them.
I would agree. I mean, you probably look at somebody on day 3, because you also have to keep in mind this team brought in Mohamed Diabate last year, who they seem very, very happy with. Obviously played special teams the entire season, limited defensively, but I do believe, with the athletic profile he had, with the production he had at University of Florida and at Utah, the Browns believe they have somebody that's going to be able to play, probably 10, 15, 20 snaps on defense for them. Probably means like a guy like Anthony Walker's not coming back. But then you would look to do the same thing this, off season, whether it is in the draft or whether it is, undrafted free agency. You're going to go try to find another linebacker that basically can start in year 1 on special teams, get his feet wet, and go that route. Everybody wants to say that Browns don't spend money on their linebackers, and they're about to have to spend money on one of their linebackers. So to think that they're just going to all of a sudden write this check now when they haven't done it in 4 off seasons to this point for a linebacker. They respect the position. They don't really pay much for it. And every single season to this point, they have gotten better production from their linebackers than as opposed to what they paid into that linebacking room. So that's one of those ones. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. And I don't think that's one thing analytically that they're going to change to this point, because as far as their standing on it, it has paid off all 4 seasons from to this point.
So this is from yardbarker.com. Offensive free agents from the Bills that could be targeted by the Browns. They go wide receiver Gabe Davis. They project 3 years, $37.5 million. 12.5 annual value, 15 guaranteed. Another guy they mentioned, Trent Sherfield. That was one of their fourth receivers in Buffalo, and then they say offensive guard David Edwards. We keep hearing Gabe Davis. I don't know that he's the quote-unquote number 2, but he's an intriguing guy if you can get him a little cheaper than what they project at $12.5 million.
See, for me, Gabe Davis, I'm in on, because, looking at what the Browns did during the Joe Flacco run, I think Gabe Davis fits this. And, look, Amari, with each passing year, you just think, obviously, the athleticism will probably start, inching back a little bit. I still think there's going to be more than enough to obviously be very, very successful in 2024. But Gabe Davis is a home run hitter. Gabe Davis is a vertical threat. And this is something, obviously, we talked about that the Browns significantly need to find a way to keep within their offense. That is one thing they need to keep from the Joe Flacco run and make sure it is part of 2024. The other two names on that list, look, I am not interested in anybody else's number 4 wide receiver. Nope. Browns have 75 of them. I don't need any others. As far as offensive line play, I am not going to pay for a veteran. I will draft. This is an excellent offensive line class at the offensive tackle position and at the guard position. But two names that probably you would affiliate probably to Ken Dorsey. Both running backs, both played with Ken Dorsey's offense in Buffalo in 2022. One is running back Avery Moss from the Indianapolis Colts. Moss had a really good year this year for the Colts and dealt with a difficult situation where Jonathan Taylor missed a lot of time and then Moss was in. So Moss would maybe kind of be relatable to whatever the situation will be for Nick Chubb this year with the Browns. And then the other one, I'm not sure he's going to get out of Houston after the year he had. But Devin Singletary, who we all know well from the playoff game, was part of the Buffalo Bills running back room in 2022, had a very successful season as a runner and a receiver. Again, I'm not sure he's going to get out of Houston, but there's two guys with Ken Dorsey ties at the running back position that you probably should keep your eyes on as far as the Cleveland Browns would be concerned.
Do you think Davis can be that number 2 guy opposite Cooper?
I think if you look at what he can do and what he's capable of, and he's a low reception, high yardage type of guy. And what you think, could you possibly get 3,000 yards between Amari Cooper, David Njoku, and maybe a Gabe Davis? And then you piecemeal another 1,000 out of Elijah Moore, Cedric Tillman, your running backs, your other tight ends. And then all of a sudden you're around that 4,000 yard mark that most teams are trying to achieve. I think it's something the Browns absolutely have to consider. Because if they can get somebody like Gabe Davis who can be successful, it's certainly going to make things easier for Amari Cooper. It's going to allow David Njoku to do what he did last year, where people just were fearing giving up the big play. And once the Browns started to achieve the big play, we saw what we've always talked about with David Njoku, that he is too big for safeties to cover. He's too fast for linebackers to cover. Gabe Davis makes a lot of sense because some of these other free agent receivers, I know a lot of people want to use the name Calvin Ridley, but I think Calvin Ridley's game is a lot more like Amari Cooper's than it would be somebody that can help in that aspect. Gabe Davis, for me, is an intriguing name just because, even if most of his game is a one-trick pony, he does his one trick and he does it well.
He usually shows up in big games without question. Jeff Lloyd, Jeff Lloyd, Locked On Browns podcast, and I'm going to step aside, take one more time out. Other side of the break, we'll continue to talk Browns. We'll talk a little bit about the upcoming draft. Sports for CLE. Be right back. Stay with us.
You might have expected all the games and all the excitement. And even though you couldn't see it right away, it's all right here. 5 games in one. $22 million in prizes between $25 and $500, and a shot at $1 million grand prize. Golden Casino, a night's worth of excitement for just $10.
We continue talking Browns with Jeff Lloyd from the Locked On Browns podcast. So this is a Browns mock draft from A to Z Sports. They go second round pick, number 55 overall, wide receiver Xavier Worthy, and that's a guy that is the speed kind of guy. 75 passes, over 1,000 yards, 4 touchdowns. But he is a deep threat without question. They come back in the 3rd round with pick 86, and they go with the linebacker Peyton Wilson, North Carolina State. He's a little bit older, 5th-year senior. Jeff, that one's one that I kind of am scratching my head with, because I don't think they're taking a linebacker that early in the draft, and they're not taking a 5th-year senior that early. That doesn't fit their age model either. What do you think about Worthy? That's an intriguing name.
Worthy is interesting. I'm 6'3", a little bit on the thinner side, under 200 pounds, but obviously very successful down at the University of Texas. There's several guys in that range. When you talk about where the Browns' first pick is, obviously in that 55 range to about 100. You can find anywhere probably from about 7 to 8 guys, based on various, top 100 draft boards. He certainly fits the bill, certainly has the size, obviously, that the Browns would like. I think they're looking to obviously try to get a little bit more size into that wide receiver room. They've tried, the Jalen Dardens and the Jakeem Grants and all these guys, return guys / receiver. And to be honest, none of them have worked. Obviously, they've gotten the most out of Elijah Moore. I think they're happy with where he is. I think the expectation is he can be more. But I think overall size into that room, and when you're talking about a team that would like to throw the ball a little bit more vertically, what does that normally mean? That normally means bigger size guys. You're not looking for the 5'10", 5'11" guys. You're looking for taller guys, obviously, for jump ball opportunities, things of that type of nature. So certainly, he would be a name on that list. As for Peyton Wilson, he's a fine player, but I think, like you said, I think age will be an issue. I think injury history will be an issue. I don't think the Browns are going to draft a linebacker in the top 100. I think they have probably 3 options in their mind, who they can put on the field right now. And, for the Browns, it's where you're looking at in the pecking order of what they have. And if we have just spent all this time talking about that, the Browns, don't necessarily devalue the linebacker position, but they certainly do not make it a high priority. If they only have 2 top 100 picks, it's a real hard time to believe that either of those picks would be spent on a linebacker.
Is there anybody that jumps out that, if they're there at 55, that you kind of think Andrew Berry runs the draft card up to the podium to get?
Well, I think for all the folks in Ohio, they might like this one. Mike Hall Jr. Mike Hall Jr., obviously out of Ohio State, certainly just a real, special guy. One of my favorite guests on my show actually, was one of Mike Hall's coaches in high school. So we've been hearing about the exploits of Mike Hall Jr. since he was 16 years old. He's just got the drive. He's got the athleticism. He's got the focus. Basically told everybody, I'm going to Ohio State. I'm going to be out of there in 3 years, and I'm going to be headed to the NFL. And, you can say those things, and to go to Ohio State and actually have those things come to fruition. Who he's working with, Coach Ed, who's working through the draft process, is another good friend that I have. And he just said, every now and then there's just some things that Mike Hall Jr. does. And he says he looks down and kind of just shakes his head. And, when you get to work with these guys who are, the freak of the athletes, every now and then you get wowed. And Mike Hall Jr. has that ability. I think if Jim Schwartz gets to see the tape and realizes that he can bring in a interior pass rusher that has the ability of Mike Hall. You got to see it times last year with Maurice Hurst Jr. But now you can maybe get a guy in who's even more athletic, younger, and I think that's a guy that they would really keep their eyes on. Wide receiver Jalen Polk out of Washington. Here's another one, 6'2", 215. Bigger wide receiver, more filled out wide receiver. Something that would certainly probably transition into a little bit more of a vertical passing game. Moving a little bit more down the line, Audric Estime, running back in Notre Dame. I think he will really appeal to the Browns. He will not be 21 years old till September. He's coming off of a 1,300-yard season for the Fighting Irish. Carries himself at about 223 pounds. He's got the size, kind of a build like Nick Chubb. He is a guy that I think the Browns would really have their eyes on if they couldn't hit on somebody in free agency. It's getting early, but we're digging into it, and obviously, we'll need the combine to start confirming some athletic numbers. But I think for what the Browns are looking for as far as offensive linemen, it is a really good tackle class. Probably a replacement guard for either Teller or Bitonio. Obviously not this year, but down the road, there are a lot of offensive guards as well. There are a lot of wide receivers. Running backs is a little scarce. Tight ends, it might be a little scarce as well. But the Browns can get some pretty heavy damage done here. Granted that, and this will be the last year of being, hampered without that first-round pick. But there should be, a lot of guys that, they can probably look into. Another offensive tackle out of Maryland, Delmar Glave, fantastic player, probably a guy that they could have, I would say in that third-round pick, or if they maneuver around a little bit, somebody can maybe have in that early fourth round. They don't currently have a pick there. He showed well then at the Senior Bowl. There are a lot of places where the Browns can improve this roster, not just for 2024, but 25 and beyond.
Jeff Lloyd, Locked On Browns podcast, as always. Appreciate the time and the insight. Thanks very much, Jeff.
All the best, Dave. Always a good time.
Jeff Lloyd, make sure you check him out. Always really good Browns coverage. Locked On Browns podcast. It's going to do it for this edition of Sports for CLE. We will see you back here tomorrow at 4 o'clock. Have a great night, everybody. See you tomorrow at 4 on Sports for CLE.